And I'm assuming the majority of you in here are consumers of animal protein. Okay? And this overhead right here talks about meat consumption. We've got several different varieties. And you might have your own particular. How many in here prefer eating beef? Okay, we've got several. How about pork? All right. Anybody into lamb? How many of you have eaten lamb? Okay, there's quite a few of you. Who prefers chicken, the other white meat? Okay, we got a few there. Anybody into turkey? What about fish? Okay, we actually got 7 into that. I just want to show you a couple things from this slide, and then we'll move on. First off, there's a lot of talk about increase in the amount of vegetarianism in the United States. Okay? There might even be a couple in here. All right? And I'm not here to talk derogatory about vegetarians, but I want you to notice that here per capita consumption of animal protein continues to move towards 200. Now it's backed off here a little bit, but some of that is basically due to the price of protein right now, and that we're in an economic slump. But the bottom line is we still consume a lot of animal protein in the United States. What this says is that you consume 200 pounds of animal protein. All right? You said, no way, I do not do that. Well, if you don't, there's somebody that's consuming more, because that's the average in the United States as far as per capita consumption is concerned. I just wanted to point that out to you. Okay, we're going to really hit a couple of things really fast. Meat inspection. What does it do? Everything that we consume has been inspected as far as animal protein is concerned. Okay? And it ensures the wholesomeness of the meat. You've probably heard or read about a lot of maybe ground beef that has been recalled because maybe they found a particular microbe in there. It might have been an E. coli, that type of thing. All that hits the press pretty quickly. And we hear people get all concerned and excited about that. But it's a really important part of the meat industry, the meat inspection aspect of it. Okay? There's 2 types, federal and state. Now, how many of you have some animals at home that you take to a processor to be harvested for your consumption at home? All right, several of you. If it's a small meat processor, it very well can be somebody that is state inspected. In Illinois, we have both federal and state inspection. Okay? State has to be just as strenuous, follows the same rules and regulations as federal. Big guys are federal. Closest beef plant here is Aurora Pack as far as beef is concerned. That's a federal plant. Tyson Fresh Meats at Jocelyn, Illinois, where our University of Illinois meat study team works out all the time, is a federally inspected plant. University of Illinois Meat Lab is a federally inspected plant. Okay? But maybe the one that you buy your meat from or have your animals harvested could be a state plant. 2 types. All right, how did this all start? Well, initially from an act June 30, 1906, really came about because of a book that was written a long time ago. Anybody read The Jungle? Okay, by Upton Sinclair. Not a real great picture of the meat industry at all. Pretty negative from that standpoint. And that was public outcry caused this Inspection Act to occur. Okay? Then another act in 1967 said state inspection has to be equal to federal inspection as far as that's concerned. So 2 important acts dealing with meat inspection. All right, if you are federally inspected, meat can be shipped between states. And state inspection, it can only be shipped within the state of Illinois. If I have a processing plant just north of Chicago, I cannot get into Wisconsin. Okay? It's against the law. If I'm next to Iowa, I can't do that. Right now, there is really an act in front of Congress that's trying to correct this and allow steak plants to ship across lines. Do you think the big guys are for that? Absolutely not. And so it's been a political football game for a number of years, but our small steak plants are making some inroads, and that may occur this year, where they can ship across the state lines, all right? All meat sold must be inspected. Any of you hunt in here? Or actually still maybe slaughter animals at home? You cannot sell that stuff. All right? You'll be spending some quality time in a Crowbar hotel if you do. So you can't do that. Okay? All meat inspection is paid through our taxes, state and federal, as such. All right. Now that's just a little bit of stuff on meat inspection. Critically important as far as consumers are concerned. What about grading? What does it do? All right. Those of you that are in FFA, maybe doing some FFA meat judging, beef grading, quality and yield is a pretty important part of that contest. We don't actually have grading as such in 4-H, but certainly the parameters that are involved are very important in place in the beef carcass class. What does it do? It segments carcasses into specific groups according to the quality of the meat. And quality, here we're talking about the palatability, those factors that impact juiciness, flavor, and tenderness. Really important. That's what a quality grade does. Yield grade tells us how much meat's going to be in the carcass. And both are critically important as far as the value of beef and carcasses are concerned. Now, this quality grade tells me that if I buy a choice steak in some retail store here in Chicago, say a top loin boneless and a slow choice, and I buy one same grade in New York, same grade in Los Angeles, and I cook them all three to the same degree of doneness, they should taste the same. That's what a grade's supposed to do. All right? Make sure that it's uniform as far as its palatability characteristics are concerned. Beef grading facts. Beef grading is optional. If I sell a bunch of cattle to Tyson Fresh Meats, live weight basis, they can say, all right, I want this carcass graded, or I don't want it graded. It's an optional deal. The federal processor pays for that particular thing as far as beef grading is concerned. Paid by the packers. It's running about $70 an hour for that service. Now, that federal grader does not get all that money at all. In fact, he just gets a fraction of it. But the packer has to pay for that. Now, what happens is that expense is passed on down to us as consumers. But the grader, or the processor, has to pay for it, whereas inspection, we pay for it through our taxes. And the beef that is USDA graded must be inspected first. That's a key thing there. And approximately 60% of all the beef that's harvested in the United States is federally graded. And you might say, well, what happened to the other 40%? Well, it happens to be cows and bulls. And we actually have grades for cows and bulls, but they're really not utilized because the majority of that meat is going to be ground into ground beef. That's our primary source of ground beef in the United States. So just 3 or 4 little bullets as far as beef grading is concerned. Okay? Carcasses that can both be quality and yield graded, or a processor can say, I want this one quality graded, I want this one yield graded. You can separate it. They're not linked together as such as far as grading is concerned. Beef quality grades. Can anybody tell me what one beef quality grade is? Come on. Choice, thank you. All right. Prime, anybody ever had a prime steak? I've got one hand here. All right. Choice, select, standard. There's about 8 of them, right? And this is what they do. Now notice here, we'd already talked about the palatability, but it is in a cooked product. It's not raw. So you try to get something that describes a piece of meat that's in the cooked form as such. Okay, here they are. All 8 of them. These are associated prime, choice, select, and standard with what we call young cattle, standard commercial cutter, commercial utility cutter and canner, are those that are associated with what I call the golden oldies. Those are the cows. Okay? And some of us, especially me and Smitty back here, years ago when he was on the meat judging team at University of Illinois, we would go once in a while to a sirloin stockade, cheap steakhouse, and we would get the T-bone steak, you know, or the ribeye for $6.50. Okay? Where did that come from? Well, that came from the loin or the rib of a commercial cow. It was either mechanically or enzyme you know, treated as far as to improve the tenderness of that meat, make sure that you had a reasonably good dining experience. I don't know if any of you have been to a Ruth Chris or a Morton's. What's a steak cost there? Maybe 40 bucks. That's the steak, right? That's not the potato, everything else that goes on top of that. So you kind of get what you pay for. We have an Alexander's Steakhouse in Champaign-Urbana where you kind of cook your own. Well, a ribeye there is 21 bucks. So, but once in a while you can go to Western Sizzler and still get that sucker for about, you know, $8 or $10. Well, you're getting this grade at Ruth Chris. You're getting this grade, and so you pay. You know, you pay. You get what you pay for, I guess is what I'm trying to say, as you look at that. And so these grades do represent some economic value as such, if you're producing beef cattle. Okay. Two main factors in determining grades. And those of you in FFA and grading, you know this already. One of them is maturity. And we have 5 levels of maturity, A, B, C, D, and E. You can see A and B are associated with what we call young cattle. Most of our market cattle in the United States are anywhere from about 12 to 18 months of age by the time they're harvested. Okay? Down here, we're talking about cattle of around 36 to 42 months of age before they whip into the C maturity. So they got some age on them. You're going to have more connective tissue in the skeletal muscle, and so it's going to be less tender if we use a dry heat cooking method on that particular product as such. So you have to learn the factors here. We don't have enough time to go into that, but you know, if you go to a meat processing plant and you see these carcasses coming down this chain, they do not have a sign on it that says, I'm 18 months old. You have to look at indicators in the carcass. Beef cattle are split right down the middle. And so you look at the vertebral column to see how much ossification and or cartilage you have in there. And that's how you determine whether it's A, B, C, D, or E. And so there's quite a bit involved there. And like I said, we don't have time to talk about it. But this is a very key part of the beef quality grade as such. Now the other key part is this, marbling. And marbling are the white flecks of fat that you see in the ribeye. Now the amazing thing is, there are in fact 10 different levels or degrees of marbling that are associated with the USDA beef grades. And this goes from the least to the most. Now if we have some young people in here that are concerned about calorie intake, got just a little bit of information for you. Okay? Crack the devoid. If I took a ribeye steak, removed the outside fat, and we're just estimating or chemically analyzing how much marbling is in that crack the devoid, it'd be less than 1% fat. Okay? If I got into this, let's just say, abundant degree here, and that's quite a bit of marbling. I'll show you a slide here that depicts these. It's hard to see in a slide, but that's quite a bit of marbling. That's enough to go high prime as far as the grade is concerned. The percentage of fat would be about 12 to 13%. Okay, question. How much fat is in a Macadoni's quarter pounder? How much fat? 20%. So you can eat a prime ribeye, as long as you remove the outside fat, and ingest less calories than you would from Macadoni quarter pounder. Okay? So you kind of got to keep that in perspective. Now here's a slide that depicts it. I realize you can't see it with the flip where you're at, but just take my word for it. there's very little marbling here, and there's a boatload here. Okay? And those, I've got those pictures, but this depicts the levels, and so these are really important factors in determining that grade, that final carcass grade. Maturity and marbling are the two big factors to say whether it's low prime, high select, whatever it might be. Our judging teams at UI spend an awful lot of time trying to get in their brain, you know, what a small amount of marbling looks like, or is, what is a modest, what's a moderate, and so forth. A lot of practice to become proficient at that particular aspect right there. Okay, yield grades, huge, really important. What do? Well, I said they estimate the amount of meat in the carcass. This is actually what they do right here. Estimates the percent of carcass weight in boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts from 4 parts of the carcass. The round loin, rib, and chuck, which would be about the top 2/3. Some of you have got the charts on the beef chart, and you can see the round loin, rib, and chuck on that beef chart. Okay, that's where these percentage of boneless trim retail cuts comes from. And you can see here, this is the kind of reverse. The higher the number, the less desirable the carcass. That means it's fatter, that it has less muscle in it as you deal and as they calculate and determine the yield grade. So 1 is great, 5 is bad news. Those of you that might buy meat at a processing plant, you walk in and the processor says, well, what do you want? I want a choice. Darn, what did Carr say? Is yield grade 2 better than yield grade 4, or is it vice versa? Don't mess up. It has a tremendous impact on the yield of meat that you're going to get when you walk out of there and take it home and put it in the freezer. Okay, you want a yield grade 2, not a yield grade 4. These are the 4 factors that are involved. Adjusted fat thickness at the 12th rib, hot carcass weight, which would be given to you, ribeye area, it's an indicator of muscling, and then last, the internal fat. Some processing plants right now remove the internal fat. Still majority leave it in. Dairy cattle have more internal fat than British breeds or exotics. Cattle that's been on feed for a long period of time will have more internal fat than cattle, say, that's been on grass, for instance. So several things impact this, as well as genetics. But these are the 4 factors that you use to determine a numerical value. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now here's an example of a yield grade 1. And I realize you can't see very much here, but you can see that this is a big ribeye and there's very little fat right there. An example of a yield grade 1, take a look at this beast. That's bad news. You know, it's really fat, got a small ribeye. Anybody, whether you raise this cattle, you feed him, the processor, everybody's going to lose money. Because labor is one of the biggest factors in a meat processing industry as far as expense is concerned. And can you imagine? It's going to take a little bit of time to remove the fat off that sucker. And so another reason why we don't want to produce those, plus of being very, very inefficient as far as the conversion of feed to muscle is concerned. Should have been sold several days before, as far as that beast is concerned. What about piggies? Anybody raise pigs? Got a few. We actually do have grades of pigs. The amazing thing is they're really not used by the meat processing industry. Most meat processors have their own grading system that they use online, but these are examples of the grades. There's 4 numbers plus one thing called utility right here. What do they do? These 4 predict the amount of lean cuts from the ham, loin, Boston butt, and picnic. And you might have another picture chart on those. This one here is the only one that impacts quality. And if you have a pig that grades utility, that is really bad news. That means that pig has really soft, watery, mushy lean. And there's a factor called PSE, in pigs, and that stands for pale, soft, and exudative pork. Exudative being a highfalutin word called watery. Okay? And if you have a pig that has that condition, he falls into this grade. It will be highly discounted as far as the industry is concerned. So the pork grades are a little different than beef. You have 4 that really do kind of what a beef yield grade does. And then you have 1 that is based on quality, and it's bad quality. 1, 2, 3, 4, and utility. I just about brought a PSC tonight for you to see, and then I forgot and left it in the cooler at the university. So I had a PSC for you to see, but I forgot it. Here's an example of a 1 and a 4. Notice that fat sucker over there on the right side. Tremendous amount of difference in fat along the back between a number 1 and a number 4, as well as muscling. But you can see how much thicker this ham is right here. This here is very narrow, slab-sided. It's just filled up with fat along the side. Bad news. But that's an example of a 1 and a 4 as far as grades of pork are concerned.